Thank you. The Wrightstown School Board hosted a special meeting with legal counsel tonight. This meeting taking place as a recall petition for Board President Angela Hanson-Winker gains enough signatures to trigger a special election. News 10 Drew Best attended that meeting. He joins us now live from our Fox Valley newsroom with the details. Drew.
Bill, the district's legal counsel welcomed questions from the board about 3 different legal issues with the goal of providing transparency to the board and the people of Wrightstown. This was an open meeting packed with members of that Wrightstown community listening on as legal counsel discussed topics including records request issues, campaigning on school grounds, and providing an update on legal fees. The legal counsel expressed concerns to the board about the process for open records requests, also mentioning past administrations may have intentionally destroyed district documents. They say staff has acknowledged this has taken place, but the circumstances remain under investigation. Hanson-Winker also making a statement to the people at the end of the meeting for the first time since the petition gained enough signatures to trigger a recall.
I'm going to continue to serve and do the best I can as an individual with this board. I will try my best to better serve you and this board and to try to bring this community together.
On the other side, Rain Warner, the board member who organized the petition, responding to Hanson-Winker's comments just moments later. What did you think of the president's comments at the end?
I think that it's, again, a policy that was talked about during the meeting about campaigning, and we just saw a reflection of it.
The district's legal counsel will now have to review the petition, checking the sufficiency of the signatures with a board clerk. Hanson-Winker's attorney says they will contest any invalid signatures with the Wisconsin Elections Commission. If the recall petition is confirmed, a special election for the position will take place sometime this spring. Reporting live in the Valley newsroom, Drew Best, Action 2 News.